Good day and welcome to the second in our series of anti-money laundering outreach sessions, presented by the Anti-Money Laundering, AML, and Anti-Terrorist Financing, ATF, Department of the Bermuda Monetary Authority, BMA. This session will focus on the Trust Service Provider, TSP, industry and is a continuation of the outreach seminars that the authority is conducting with regulated financial institutions as part of our engagement strategy. This seminar aims to ensure that industry sectors are kept up to date on changes to AML legislation, areas of Financial Action Task Force, FATF, focus and areas where industry sectors are performing well or need to make improvements. We hope this engagement will increase the dialogue on critical issues, assist the financial services sector in strengthening its AML/ATF systems and controls, and enhance overall compliance with the legislation. In this presentation, we will provide a high-level sectoral overview for TSPs and discuss the risks of money laundering and terrorist financing as identified in the National Risk Assessment, NRA. Following that, we will discuss the AML/ATF regulations and preventive measures designed to enhance your AML and ATF program. Finally, the Financial Intelligence Agency will discuss suspicious activity reporting and provide an overview of the trust sector's ML and TF trends and typologies. We hope this session not only helps to strengthen your AML program, but that it will create the opportunity for more outreach and positive engagement with the BMA. A general overview of the trust service provider sector. Bermuda has been in the trust business for over 50 years and developed a strong international reputation for forming trust structures. Bermuda's main statute governing licensed trustees carrying on trust business is the Trusts, Regulation of Trust Business, Act 2001, an act which came into force on January 25, 2002. This act requires that TSPs operating within Bermuda to possess a limited or unlimited trust license. The BMA vets and continually monitors licensed trustees to ensure, among other things, that fit and proper persons control them and meet minimum net asset requirements. Other supervisory measures include assessing if they have adequate insurance, records, systems, and controls and are committed to carrying out their business with integrity and skill. As of March 2024, Bermuda's trust sector had 19 licensed trust companies, or TSPs. The TSP industry represents a mature sector, with approximately 33% of business representing discretionary trusts or $39 billion of assets under administration, purpose trusts representing 20% or $23 billion assets under administration, and other trusts, in the form of private trust companies, PTCs, representing 33% or $39 billion of assets under administration. Reference, Bermuda's ML/NRA 2020. A general overview of the trust service provider sector. Bermuda has been in the trust business for over 50 years and developed a strong international reputation for forming trust structures. Bermuda's main statute governing licensed trustees carrying on trust business is the Trusts, Regulation of Trust Business, Act 2001, an act which came into force on January 25, 2002. This act requires that TSPs operating within Bermuda to possess a limited or unlimited trust license. The BMA vets and continually monitors licensed trustees to ensure, among other things, that fit and proper persons control them and meet minimum net asset requirements. Other supervisory measures include assessing if they have adequate insurance, records, systems, and controls and are committed to carrying out their business with integrity and skill. As of March 2024, Bermuda's trust sector had 19 licensed trust companies, or TSPs. The TSP industry represents a mature sector, with approximately 33% of business representing discretionary trusts or $39 billion of assets under administration, purpose trusts representing 20% or $23 billion assets under administration, and other trusts, in the form of private trust companies, PTCs, representing 33% or $39 billion of assets under administration. Reference, Bermuda's ML/NRA 2020. This slide represents several key pieces of AML/ATF and sanctions legislation that impact the TSP sector. You will note that the International Sanctions Act 2003 is a standalone piece of legislation, separate from the AML legislation. For this seminar, we will largely focus on the 2008 Proceeds of Crime AML/ATF regulations or POCR, which apply to all regulated financial institutions, including TSPs. We emphasize the regulations here because it is the main piece of legislation that the authority uses to check a regulated financial institution's compliance when we conduct an AML on-site. It is expected that TSPs have AML/ATF policies and procedures in place which are tailored to the nature, size, and context of the business and cover all of the relevant acts and the AML regulations. Here are a few regulations we would like to highlight. Customer Client Due Diligence, CDD, whereby the terms are explained and processes are documented for the collection of CDD and verification of clients. Enhanced Due Diligence, this is where having identified politically exposed persons, PEPs, is important, along with making the distinction between local, Bermuda, PEPs versus foreign international PEPs. There should also be a consideration of any other high-risk factors. Ongoing monitoring, providing a review schedule fitting the assigned risk level. For example, 1, 3 and 5 years for high, medium and low. Outsourcing, it is important that if outsourcing is used the respective roles are clearly documented. A regulated financial institution, RFI, is still responsible and can be held liable if something goes wrong with the outsourced responsibilities. Therefore, it is very important that any AML/ATF outsourced functions are appropriately monitored and oversight is applied. Consequently, RFIs must assign a senior officer in Bermuda with ultimate responsibility for overseeing the outsourced arrangements. Compliance Officer and MLRO, it is important that the CO and MLRO are adequately trained to carry out their respective roles. Further, the Compliance Officer must be employed at the managerial level. This will help to support their work in carrying out the roles and responsibilities under the AML/ATF program. The regulations also require systems and controls to be in place, including having a business risk assessment that must be updated when the RFI's circumstances change, for example, with the addition of a new product and service. Finally, the RFI should ensure that its independent audit and training obligations are adhered to as well as the obligation to have a compliance officer employed at the managerial level. This will help to support their work in carrying out the roles and responsibilities under the AML/ATF program. It is important to note that the risk-based approach forms an essential part of the AML/ATF framework, everything from how the national risk assessment results impacts the supervisor's focus on certain sectors versus others, to the way in which a regulated institution assesses the MLTF risk of its business depending on its business model. It also impacts how a firm views its customer base and how it applies CDD, depending on the risk of the individual customer, simplified due diligence, customer due diligence and enhanced due diligence. Turning to the MLTF risks of the sector, this is a heat map taken from Bermuda's 2020 National Risk Assessment, which indicates that the inherent risk for money laundering within the TSP, Trust and Service Provider, sector is high. This rating is based on the overall money laundering threat and inherent vulnerability. If you are curious about why this is the case, it is because the ML, money laundering, threat rating for the TSP sector was high due to several factors. In many of the suspicious activity reports, SARs, filed by the sector during the review period, suspected foreign tax crimes and fraud were significant features. In particular, law enforcement reported that domestic authorities provided assistance in a large-scale investigation overseas, in which a foreign national was suspected of having laundered over $1.9 billion using a local private trust company, PTC, to evade taxes, with some evidence of complicity on the part of the PTC. Also, Bermuda received criminal tax information requests from overseas counterparts related to foreign crimes impacting Bermuda's trust sector in 2017 and 2018. There were no domestic ML investigations based on locally generated proceeds of crime during the period. Overall, the ML threat from internationally sourced businesses remains higher than from local clients within the sector. In light of this, and other contributing factors, such as the sector potentially being targeted for ML purposes from foreign tax crimes, the ML threat was deemed to be high. On the next slide, we will explore the vulnerabilities within Bermuda's trust sector, particularly its susceptibility to ML. The landscape for TSPs presents many challenges, with significant implications for financial integrity. Globally, TSPs have been demonstrated to be attractive and frequently targeted by criminals because of their crucial roles as trustees, administrators, and intermediaries who manage the finances of wealthy individuals. PTCs in particular have typically been used for tax evasion purposes. Bermuda's trust sector primarily serves high net worth individuals and PEPs, both domestically and internationally, amplifying the inherent ML risk. For this reason, trust vehicles, given their complexity and confidentiality, present a potential avenue for ML activities. As noted in the last NRA, it is recognized that Bermuda's client base profile for trust products and PTCs remains high risk, given that clients are largely high net worth individuals and PEPs, both residents and from overseas. Also, Bermuda features sectoral characteristics common to the industry globally, for example the high dollar value of trusts managed in the sector and the global reach of trusts under operation. In 2020, the NRA applied a granular approach to its analysis and assessing 5 broad categories of trust products administered by licensed trust companies. Discretionary trusts were rated as having a high vulnerability. Fixed interest trusts medium. Purpose trusts medium high. Charitable trusts medium high. Employee benefit trust medium high. Other trusts, unit trusts, PTCs, high. On terrorist finance risk, it was established that Bermuda's TF risk was low in the previous 2 NRAs. While there is no evidence for Bermuda being a source of TF, the jurisdiction has made several recommendations to strengthen its ATF framework to ensure that the regime remains robust and can adapt appropriately to any emerging TF threats. Bermuda will be undertaking another NRA this year, which will reflect any changes of risk since the last one. Moving from national MLTF threats and vulnerabilities of the sector, we turn now to measuring and assessing the MLTF risks of individual trust service providers. Under Regulation 16 of the POCR or regulations, RFIs must assess the MLTF risk of its business model and ensure that it has sufficient capacity and expertise to manage the risks it faces. Each RFI must ensure that its risk assessment methodology and the results of its risk assessments are documented, approved by senior management and readily available to be shared with competent authorities. The stages of producing a business risk assessment are as follows. Stage 1. Identify and assess inherent risks. To assign inherent risk ratings, consider all relevant risk factors concerning the RFI's customers, business relationships, including outsourcing and reliance relationships, countries or geographic areas, services, delivery channels, products and transactions. Stage 2 is assessing the likelihood of a risk occurring and its impact. Once all the relevant risks have been identified, it is important to assess the likelihood and impact of the money laundering risks that the business could be exposed to based on the identified risk factors. This will vary, based on a company's business plan and target market. Some corporate service providers focus on high net worth individuals that often come with high risk factors such as the nature of their business as it pertains to how they make money versus customers that are regulated entities. Stage 3 involves applying the appropriate controls. The next step would be to put in place the proper AML/ATF controls such as a documented policy and procedure manual. Having appropriate systems in place can include technology for housing data or screening. In addition to ensuring the compliance officer and MLRO are fit and proper, it is essential to understand the risks of the business. Stage 4 is reviewing the residual risk and reviewing the BRA annually, or when changes occur. We will go further into this in another session that will be provided later. For today's session, we wanted to provide a high-level overview of the BRA process. Looking at the inherent risk factors of a TSP a bit further. When we look at the different 4 categories of risk factors for the sector, the main threats and vulnerabilities lie within the customer risk and the product and service risk. Typical customers within the TSP sector are exposed to money laundering from foreign sources, specifically related to tax evasion, fraud, corruption, market manipulation, insider trading and so forth. Therefore, the ML threat to this sector is high. For TSPs, we also recognize that obtaining CDD and reliable beneficial ownership information can be potentially challenging when dealing with international clients. When we look at product and service offerings, the trust sector has been identified as a major gateway for international interests into Bermuda's financial services market. This means the sector is potentially exposed to a higher scale of money laundering when compared to other sectors. In addition, a 2013 FATF report identified in an analysis of suspicious transaction reports that legal professionals were complicit or unknowingly involved in their clients' criminality. Having large or complex structures makes it challenging for the TSP to fully understand the purpose or activities of these types of structures for which they are involved. The geographic risk or country risk and delivery channel risk threat and vulnerability are comparable to the other sectors. We will go further into this in another session that will be provided later. For today's session, we wanted to provide a high-level overview of the BRA process. Here, we highlight some examples of red flag indicators for money laundering. 1. Transactions or services that utilize complex and opaque legal entities and arrangements. These would be transactions that do not make any economic sense for the customer or have a legal structure that is not easy to understand the purpose. 2. There may be difficulty identifying the natural person beneficiaries of a trust because the beneficiary of a trust is a legal person or another trust. 3. A client who is unwilling or unable to provide satisfactory information to verify the source of wealth or source of funds, and 4. A non-face-to-face trust business transaction initiated from a high-risk jurisdiction. For more red flags associated with your sector, please review the final pages of the sector-specific guidance notes for the trust business. From a regulatory standpoint, you might wonder what the supervisor is seeing as a daily part of our job. This discussion will touch on the obligations that TSPs are finding to be the most challenging. We have briefly mentioned the obligations, which are located in the POCR, that we use as the primary legislation when evaluating a company during an on-site visit. Regarding supervision, the AML/ATF department has found that TSPs have encountered compliance challenges related to various regulatory obligations. Issues we have seen are indicated on this slide. We recommend that you review your policies and procedures in relation to the POCR, especially concerning the obligations listed. 1. We have found AML policies which have not been implemented properly in practice. This leads to challenges during on-sites and sometimes uncovers systemic issues. 2. AML/ATF audits, gaps are not properly captured. For example, the purpose of independent audit reports is to provide a detailed overview of any gaps or areas of improvement to the AML/ATF framework. This helps a company mitigate their money laundering risks. And 3. Finally, when regulated entities use shelf policies that are written by third-party consultants and rely on these firms too heavily for advice instead of educating themselves about the regulations and AML obligations, there are often problems. The BMA conducts on-site visits to review the AML framework in place with the aim of ensuring that the company's AML/ATF program meets the legislative requirements. Companies should be prepared. This is the company's opportunity to showcase its robust compliance framework. It should be business as usual, as we are only checking against what companies have already committed to as part of their AML obligations under POCR. Another important step is to document information that should be in place as part of your license requirements. We expect that these are reviewed at least annually to ensure compliance with the AML/ATF regulations. File testing and submissions should also be submitted in a timely manner. During on-site sessions, there should be no modifications to documents with the exception of client requests or business as usual. One of the biggest questions we have had in the last few months is how to prepare for an AML/ATF on-site. As part of this process, the RFI assess its AML/ATF framework and ensure that the company's AML/ATF policies and procedures are up to date with the legislation. This step should also include ensuring that the RFI's policies and procedures are compliant with the sanctions legislation and guidance. TSP should ensure compliance officers, MLROs, management, staff, and board members are receiving the appropriate AML/ATF training for the respective roles. Of course, every AML/ATF process should be documented, which assists with record keeping and tracking for reporting purposes. For every procedure, there should be a control in place. TSPs should check whether their policies and procedures being appropriately implemented by performing quality assurance on their controls. Finally, companies should ensure that they have a well-scoped, comprehensive, robust, independent AML/ATF audit performed annually by a qualified person and ensure any findings are actioned, and senior management and the board are aware of the findings and receive regular updates on their status. Please refer to Chapter 1 of the BMA's AML/ATF General Guidance Notes for further clarification on the independent audit requirements. This will improve your firm's overall compliance with the AML obligations and prepare your company for an AML on-site examination. And now we will turn it over to the Financial Intelligence Agency, who will speak about suspicious activity reports relating to TSP business, TSP trends and typologies, and the quality of SAR findings. We will start by providing an overview of suspicious activity report filings in 2023 by trust service providers. The year 2023 saw a total of 2 suspicious activity reports filed by 2 trust service providers with the Financial Intelligence Agency, FIA, and 2 trust service providers registered with the FIA. Please note that it is important for reporting entities that have several reporting sector licenses to file under the reporting sector license and corresponding reporting entity where the suspect activity was detected. This oversight has permitted lower filings in this reporting sector. Next up, TSP trends. Since January 1, 2020, the FIA has received 12 filings from 5 TSPs. The 3 trends identified in these filings are tax offenses, declined or refused business due to suspect activity, and refusal to comply with CDD requirements. Now, let's review a TSP typology involving suspected money laundering and tax offenses. In this case, the subject was inquiring into how he could best avoid paying U.S. taxes. In 2023, a trust service provider had an in-office walk-in visit from a U.S. citizen, Mr. A, who specifically inquired into understanding how he could avoid paying U.S. taxes. Mr. A was joined by a colleague whose name was not obtained. It was unclear if the colleague was a local resident or not. The TSP representative explained that with FATCA and CRS tax rules in place, it was impossible for a U.S. citizen to avoid paying tax or disclosing assets on which U.S. taxes were legally due. It was also confirmed with Mr. A that whilst the TSP might be in a position to help with a fully U.S. tax disclosed structure, the TSP would not be in a position to provide services if the sole purpose and intention was assisting a U.S. person in not meeting U.S. tax obligations. Mr. A mentioned that he had been advised to set up a Bermuda company owned by a trust to which his name should not appear. The TSP representative asked Mr. A where he had received this advice, to which the reply was, "This was general advice." The TSP representative asked if Mr. A had any family outside of the U.S., to which he stated no. Mr. A then explained that he was working for a syndicate in Singapore that provided loans of a minimum of $10 million, with no maximum, to both U.S. and non-U.S. startup companies. Mr. A named several local service providers to the TSP representative and asked if it was possible for the other local TSPs to assist him. The TSP did reiterate that the other local TSPs would also have the same obligation to report, and without specific U.S. tax and structuring advice, it would likely be quite difficult to open a Bermuda company, Bermuda trust, and/or Bermuda bank account with any provider, as all would be subject to FATCA reporting. Some of the red flags of suspicious activity that were noted in this filing are: it appeared that Mr. A completed research on the potential structuring of his assets, allowing him to remain anonymous but still benefiting from the funds. Mr. A's website was also reviewed and was deemed to be very generic for a multi-million-dollar operation with international business ventures. Mr. A also attended the TSP with a third party who was not identified. Mr. A purposely flew to Bermuda to seek a relationship with a TSP. Mr. A was concerned that his link to Mexico would negate his efforts to establish a relationship with a TSP in Bermuda. Mr. A inquired if other jurisdictions, BVI or Cayman, would allow him to structure a business account for tax avoidance purposes. FIA update. Disclosures were made to local and overseas competent authorities by the FIA. The results of these disclosures are as follows. Mr. A stated that he came to Bermuda by private jet, however, records show that he arrived on a commercial airline. Mr. A stated that his relationship was with a syndicate in Singapore that provided loans, however, this statement changed as noted in a filing by a local bank about the suspect activity of Mr. A. Furthermore, Mr. A told the local bank that his relationship involved high net worth individuals in Saudi Arabia through oil money. Both the local bank and TSP declined to approve Mr. A as a client and recommended that Mr. A seek advice from a tax specialist. Report indicators. Report indicators selected by the CSP to identify the characteristics within the SAR narrative included declined or fused business due to suspected criminal activity and tax evasion. Key takeaway. Due to the TSP's thoroughness, details about Mr. A were captured, which were corroborated with a filing by another reporting entity and could be readily passed on to and acted upon by local and overseas competent authorities. This filing is a great example of the effectiveness of the TSP sector regarding detecting and filing suspect activity linked to potential clients. Quality of suspicious activity report filings in 2023. The overall quality was good and none of the reports were rejected by the Financial Intelligence Agency. As a reminder, always provide any supporting documentation, for example, copies of IDs, account opening documents, and adverse media links, that will support the narrative of the suspicious activity report. This information assists with the analysis of the FIA analysts and the dissemination of informative disclosures to the competent authorities in Bermuda and in other jurisdictions. Upcoming actions for the FIA. The FIA will be providing guidance to trust service providers about the Bermuda consent regime as it pertains to the termination of clients due to suspect activity. This action is being taken as FIA consent requests have been filed by trust service providers seeking advice on how to terminate a client relationship involving suspect activity, especially when the client may potentially seek to obtain the services of another local trust service provider. SAR filing reminders. The FIA encourages the filing of suspicious activity reports involving declined business of a current or potential customer due to the identification of suspect activity, for example, a change in communication methods, a show of aggressiveness, the use of suspect comments, the detection of suspect transactions, or the detection of adverse media. The FIA discourages filings based solely on a client's refusal to provide CDD when no suspect activity can be identified. Now, we will turn it back over to the BMA, which will discuss non-compliance trends, on-site examination practices, and some helpful AML program tips. Here are some TSP sector-specific resources that you might find helpful when reviewing your AML/ATF framework. This includes links to the BMA website as well as our general and sector-specific guidance notes for TSPs. Other useful links are shown here and include links to the FIA website and the Financial Action Task Force reports relating to the TSP business. In conclusion, the authority spent a significant amount of time today discussing MLTF risk trends, typologies, reporting, and preventive measures. The Financial Intelligence Agency has provided trends, typologies, and reporting information to consider when revising your staff training and AML/ATF policies and procedures. We hope that today's presentation has been informative and will help to enhance your company's systems and controls and improve AML/ATF compliance moving forward. From a regulator's perspective, we are here to assist you in achieving these objectives. From a national perspective, each of us plays a role in strengthening Bermuda's AML/ATF framework and keeping malicious individuals at bay. To achieve this, we must invest time in enhancing our AML and regulatory compliance to make our companies more resilient. By strengthening our systems, controls, and reporting processes, we can expect improved business outcomes and enhanced reputational benefits. We all have a part to play, and we invite you to join us on this journey for the good of your company and Bermuda's reputation as a highly respected, international financial center. If you have questions you think of later, please do not hesitate to contact your industry association or reach out to us directly on aml@bma.bm or the FIA on info@fia.bm.